Human helped the alien girl escape hunters, but her mark bound him as her chosen witness. Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to our main character. Nick Walker was just an ordinary guy. Or, at least, that's what he thought. Living in a small, nondescript apartment in the middle of a busy city, his days followed the same routine: work, eat, sleep, repeat. Nothing ever changed. Nothing ever exciting happened. Or so he believed, until one fateful evening. It started like any other. Nick had just finished a late shift at the tech firm where he worked and was walking home through the quiet, dark streets of the city. The air was crisp, and there was an odd sense of stillness around him. He took a deep breath, his boots echoing on the pavement. As he turned a corner, he froze. A strange, glowing figure appeared before him. At first, he thought his mind was playing tricks on him. But the figure was real, definitely real. It was a girl, but not just any girl. She was unlike anything he had ever seen, with pale skin that shimmered in the moonlight and eyes that seemed to hold the vastness of the cosmos within them. Her features were delicate, almost ethereal, and her long hair seemed to move as if it had a life of its own. Before Nick could speak, the girl spoke in a language he didn't understand, her voice soft yet urgent. She looked around nervously, as though she was being chased. Nick instinctively stepped forward, ready to help, but before he could act, a group of shadowy figures appeared at the end of the alley, moving with swift, predator-like precision. The girl's eyes widened in terror. Without thinking, Nick reached out and grabbed her hand. He didn't know why, but he knew he had to help her. It wasn't just a sense of duty, it was something deeper, something that felt like fate. He pulled her into a nearby abandoned building. Hiding in the shadows. The figures passed by, seemingly unaware of their presence. Nick's heart raced. What was going on? Who was this girl? And why was she being hunted? The girl's breath was shallow, her fear palpable. She turned to him, eyes wide with gratitude, but also confusion. You saved me," she whispered in a language he couldn't understand. Despite the confusion, Nick could see the panic in her eyes. She didn't seem like an ordinary person. She seemed alien. He had no idea who or what she was, but in that moment, he knew one thing for sure: he wasn't going to leave her side. Little did he know, that simple act of kindness would bind him to her in ways he couldn't even imagine. The girl, still trembling, looked up at Nick with wide eyes, her expression a mixture of fear and gratitude. Nick didn't know what to say. His mind raced with 1,000 questions, but all he could do was focus on the fact that he was now caught in something he didn't understand. She wasn't from around here, he was certain of that. The glow that seemed to radiate from her skin, the way her eyes seemed to shimmer with something otherworldly, all pointed to one thing: she was not human. But he didn't care. She needed help. And, somehow, he knew he had to be the one to give it. "What are you?" Nick finally asked, his voice barely a whisper. She didn't respond at first. Instead, she glanced around the dark room, as if she was looking for something, or someone. The silence stretched on until she finally spoke, but the words were alien to him. It was a language unlike any he had ever heard. The sound of it was strange, melodic, yet harsh, like nothing from this world. Nick stared at her, unsure of how to respond. But the fear in her eyes told him that whatever was happening, she wasn't here by choice. She was being hunted. He could sense it. There was something primal in the way she reacted to the darkness outside, something that told him time was running out. "Hunters," she whispered, her voice shaky. "They'll come for us. They won't stop until they find me." Nick's brow furrowed. Hunters. Who were these people? Why were they after her? His mind raced, trying to make sense of it all. But no answers came. Instead, a sudden noise from the street outside made them both freeze. Footsteps. Heavy, deliberate. They weren't alone anymore. Nick's heart pounded in his chest as he realized they had to move fast. He grabbed her hand again, not thinking about the consequences, just about getting them out of there. Come on, he urged, his voice tight with urgency. We can't stay here. The girl nodded quickly, her eyes still wide with fear. She moved with a grace that seemed unnatural, her movements fluid and swift as she followed him into the narrow corridors of the building. They didn't speak as they ran, both knowing the danger was too close. Nick led them down a series of back alleys, the city now seeming darker, colder, as if it too was aware of the looming threat. Every turn they took felt like a step closer to something they couldn't outrun. After what felt like hours, they stopped to catch their breath. The girl, now leaning against a brick wall, was still shaking, but her eyes had a distant look to them, as if she was thinking about something far beyond their current predicament. Nick didn't know what to say to reassure her. He didn't even know what he was doing, he was just following his instincts. And right now, his instincts told him they needed to keep moving. The girl turned to him, her eyes filled with a strange intensity. You don't understand, she said softly. I'm not just being hunted. I'm marked. Nick blinked, confused. Marked. She nodded slowly, her expression growing more serious. I have a mark, a symbol. It binds me to someone who will witness everything that happens to me. And now, you're that person. Nick's mind raced. A mark. What was she talking about? But before he could ask more, the sound of footsteps echoed down the alley once again. They weren't alone. They were never alone. And this time, the danger felt closer. Much closer. They were no longer alone. Nick could feel the tension building, the hairs on the back of his neck standing up. He pulled the girl into the shadow of a nearby building, his heart pounding. The footsteps grew louder, heavier, echoing off the narrow alleyways like a drumbeat. Whoever, or whatever, was following them, they weren't far behind. The girl's breathing was shallow, her body trembling against his. She whispered, barely audible, they're close. They can sense us. Nick glanced around, desperately searching for an escape. The alley was too narrow. The city, which had always felt so familiar to him, now seemed like a maze, an unwelcoming place that offered no refuge. The footsteps stopped, and for a moment, everything was eerily still. Nick held his breath, hoping against hope that they wouldn't be found. Then, the girl spoke again. We can't stay here. They will track us down. Nick didn't need to be told twice. He pulled her gently but firmly, leading her down another dark alley. They moved quickly but quietly, their footsteps barely making a sound against the cold concrete. They passed through several more narrow streets, every corner and every shadow feeling like a potential hiding place. But there was no time to stop. The weight of the girl's words still echoed in Nick's mind, I'm marked. The words were like a puzzle he couldn't solve, a mystery he couldn't understand. Who was hunting her? Why was she marked? And what did it mean that he had now become part of her fate? His thoughts were interrupted by the sudden, sharp sound of something crashing to the ground behind them. He turned just in time to see a figure dart into the alley. The girl's eyes widened with fear. Run, she cried, her voice urgent and panicked. Nick didn't hesitate. He grabbed her hand and ran, not knowing where they were going but knowing they couldn't stop. Their footsteps echoed loudly as they sprinted through the streets, the girl's strange, alien presence guiding their path. Her pace was faster than his, almost as if she was leading him rather than the other way around. Nick's lungs burned with the effort, but he didn't dare slow down. He couldn't. The sound of pursuit grew louder, closer. They were still being followed. He glanced at the girl, her face set in determination but also tinged with fear. Despite the chaos, there was something captivating about her. Her eyes, so deep and otherworldly, seemed to see through him, to see something in him that he didn't even understand. They rounded a corner, and ahead of them, Nick saw the faint glow of lights. A street, perhaps. He pushed himself harder, knowing that if they could reach that street, they might be able to blend into the crowd. But as they neared the end of the alley, something strange happened. The girl slowed down, pulling Nick to a stop. Her face paled, and for the first time, he saw her fear truly reflected in her expression. She turned to him, her voice trembling. They know. They've already found us. Nick's heart dropped. They weren't going to make it. Not like this. The girl's face was pale, her eyes wide with panic. Nick could feel her grip tightening on his hand as she glanced nervously over her shoulder. The sound of footsteps grew louder, more pronounced. They weren't alone. They never had been. He could feel his pulse racing, his mind desperately searching for an escape. But as the girl's trembling form pulled him further down the alley, Nick realized there was nowhere left to run. They were trapped. "What do we do?" he asked, his voice strained. The girl's breath came in short gasps, her body stiff with fear. "There's no time," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "We have to face them." Nick's heart skipped a beat. He hadn't signed up for any of this. He was just an ordinary guy, someone who had stumbled into an extraordinary situation. The weight of the girl's words crashed down on him. They weren't just running from some normal group of hunters, these were something else, something more dangerous. "You don't understand," the girl continued, her voice cracking. "I'm not just running from them. They are bound to me. They can never stop hunting me until they get what they want." Nick took a step back, his mind reeling. What do they want? She hesitated for a moment, her eyes flickering with something almost like regret. "They want me to fulfill my destiny. But I'm not ready. I can't. Not like this." Nick didn't know what she meant, but the urgency in her voice told him that they were running out of time. He looked down the alley, seeing nothing but darkness. Then, without warning, a shadow moved toward them. Nick's heart dropped. He spun around, pulling the girl behind him, instinctively shielding her from whatever was coming. But the girl wasn't afraid anymore. She stepped forward, standing tall despite the fear in her eyes. "I won't run anymore," she said, her voice steady. Nick looked at her, confused. "What are you?" Before he could finish, the figure in the alley revealed itself, stepping into the dim light. It was a man, but his presence felt wrong, like he didn't belong in this world. His eyes glowed faintly, his features sharp and unsettling. The girl's breath hitched in her throat. "You've come for me," she said softly, her voice full of resignation. "I don't have a choice, do I?" The man didn't speak at first. He simply stood there, his glowing eyes fixed on the girl. Then, in a voice that was cold, almost mechanical, he spoke. "No. You don't." Nick didn't know what to do. He had no idea who this man was or what he wanted, but the tension in the air was unbearable. The girl seemed to accept it, but Nick couldn't. He wasn't going to let her face this alone. "I won't let you take her," he said, his voice strong, even though his heart was racing. The man's eyes flickered with a brief moment of amusement, as though Nick's words were insignificant. "You don't understand," the man said, his voice low and eerie. "You've already become part of her story. There's no turning back now." Nick's mind raced. What did that mean? He didn't know. All he knew was that this wasn't just about running anymore. This was about something much bigger, something far beyond his understanding. And now, he was in the middle of it. The girl turned to Nick, her eyes softening. "You don't have to do this," she said quietly, her voice full of gratitude. "But I can't let you go back to your life. Not anymore." Nick opened his mouth to speak, but the words caught in his throat. He didn't know what to say. How could he go back after all of this? How could he walk away from a situation that had already changed his life forever? He didn't have an answer. But one thing was clear, there was no going back now. Ivan, the mysterious figure in the alley, took a slow step forward, his glowing eyes locking onto Nick's. The air around them seemed to grow heavier, charged with an unnatural tension. Nick could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. The girl, still standing tall, did not look away from Ivan. Her body was tense, ready, but there was a certain sadness in her eyes that Nick couldn't ignore. "You don't understand," Ivan repeated, his voice low and cold. "This is inevitable. You are both bound by forces beyond your comprehension." Nick's heart pounded as he glanced between Ivan and the girl. His instincts screamed at him to protect her, but everything about this situation felt wrong, impossible. How had they gotten to this point? He had only tried to help her, to do the right thing. "She's just a girl," Nick said, his voice shaking but firm. "You can't just take her." Ivan's eyes flickered with amusement, his lips curling into a small, unsettling smile. Oh, she's so much more than that, Ivan replied cryptically. And so are you, Nick Walker. You have no idea what you've stepped into. The girl's voice, almost a whisper, interrupted the strange conversation. He's right, she said softly, looking at Nick with a mix of regret and affection. I'm sorry, Nick. I never wanted to drag you into this, but now, we're connected. You can't just walk away. Nick's chest tightened. He couldn't breathe, couldn't think clearly. What did she mean? What connection? How was it even possible? He shook his head, trying to push the fear and confusion away. I don't know what's going on, he said, his voice strained. But I won't let you be taken from me. I won't let them have you. The girl's eyes softened, but there was a sorrowful acceptance in them. It's not about them, she said quietly. It's about me. It's about the mark. Her hand, the one that had once seemed so delicate, reached up to touch the symbol on her skin. Nick didn't understand. What was the mark? Why did it bind them together? Before he could ask more, Ivan spoke again, his voice sending a shiver down Nick's spine. The mark is a symbol of the pact. A pact that you, Nick, have unwittingly become a part of. The moment you helped her, you became her witness. Her protector, for better or for worse. Nick's blood ran cold. Witness. Protector. He didn't know what that meant, but it didn't sound good. He turned to the girl, his mind racing, his heart aching with the weight of everything he still didn't know. What is this pact? He demanded. She looked at him with such a deep sadness in her eyes, like she knew the burden of the truth would break him. The pact is a binding, she said. Slowly. A connection between us. One that forces us together, no matter what. And once you're marked, you can never go back. Nick felt a cold chill sweep through him, as if the world around him had shifted. I don't care about the pact, he said fiercely. I won't let you be a prisoner. The girl stepped closer, her face inches from his, her eyes filled with a quiet determination. You don't have a choice, Nick, she whispered. You're already a part of this story. And now, we have to face what comes next. Nick's heart raced as he looked back at Ivan, whose expression remained unreadable, cold. Whatever this was, it wasn't over. And it wasn't going to be easy. But one thing was certain, he wasn't going to leave her. Not now. Not ever. The silence between them was thick, heavy with unspoken words and unacknowledged truths. Nick could feel his heart hammering in his chest, the tension building, as he stared at the girl and the enigmatic figure who stood before them. Ivan had not moved, his expression unchanged, as if he were waiting for something. For what, Nick couldn't be sure. So what happens now? Nick's voice was barely more than a whisper, his breath shallow, betraying the fear he couldn't suppress. The girl, Liora, turned to him, her eyes softening, a trace of sadness still lingering in them. Now, we have to face the consequences, she said quietly. Nick swallowed hard, his mind still struggling to process the weight of her words. He didn't understand. He didn't want to understand. How had a simple act of kindness turned into a chain of events that threatened to pull him into something far beyond his control? The mark. The pact. He had no idea what any of it meant, but the more he heard, the more he realized that there was no turning back. Not for him. Not for her. You're bound to me now, Liora continued, her voice steady but laced with a quiet strength. There's no escaping it. The moment you helped me, your fate became entwined with mine. Nick's throat tightened. He wanted to argue, to fight against it, but something in her eyes told him she wasn't just talking about a physical connection. She was talking about something deeper, something that went beyond time, beyond reason. So, what now? He asked again, his words tinged with frustration. Liora stepped closer to him, her presence somehow both comforting and unsettling at the same time. Now, we survive. Together. Nick's gaze flickered to Ivan, whose silence was beginning to feel oppressive. And what about him? He asked, his voice edged with suspicion. What does he want? Liora's expression hardened for a brief moment before she turned back to face Ivan. He's not the one we need to worry about right now, she said, her voice firm. We're already in his grasp. The real threat is what comes next. Ivan's smile returned, thin and cold, as he stepped forward. She's right, he said, his voice cutting through the tension like a knife. You have no idea what you're facing. What you've just walked into. Nick's chest tightened as Ivan's words hung in the air, the weight of them settling in. Whatever it was they were about to face, it wasn't something either of them could escape. The mark on Liора's skin, the one that had connected them, wasn't just a symbol, it was a contract, an irreversible bond. And Nick was already bound by it, whether he wanted to be or not. Ivan's eyes flickered with something darker, something that sent a chill down Nick's spine. You're part of her story now, Ivan continued, his tone growing colder. You'll witness everything she goes through. Everything she becomes. The girl's hand found Nick's, a silent gesture of reassurance. But even her touch couldn't completely calm the storm of uncertainty that raged within him. We'll figure this out, Liora whispered, her words barely audible as she met his gaze. Nick nodded, though doubt still lingered in the back of his mind. They were in this together. But what did that really mean? What kind of future awaited them now that they were bound by forces beyond their comprehension? The answers were elusive, just out of reach. And in the stillness of the alley, with Ivan's unsettling presence looming, Nick realized that their journey had only just begun. The silence between Nick and Liora grew heavy as they walked through the narrow alley, the weight of Ivan's words hanging over them like a dark cloud. Nick tried to push the unease out of his mind, but the truth was undeniable. He was part of something now, something far beyond his understanding. The mark, the pact, the bond, everything that had started as a simple act of kindness had spiraled into something he couldn't control. And now, he was bound to Liora in ways he couldn't escape. They continued walking, the sound of their footsteps echoing through the quiet streets. Every now and then, Nick would glance at Liora, trying to read her expression. She was quiet, focused, but there was a distant look in her eyes, as if she was lost in thoughts far away. The girl had told him she wasn't just running from hunters, there was something bigger at play, something much darker. But what? What was coming next? Nick didn't have any answers. His mind was spinning, filled with questions he couldn't answer. Liora, he said softly, breaking the silence. What's going to happen now? What is it that we're really running from? She stopped walking and turned to face him, her eyes meeting his with a steady intensity. We're not just running, Nick, she said, her voice low but resolute. We're surviving. Together. But the real question is, are you ready for what comes next? Nick felt his stomach tighten. He didn't know what she meant, but he knew one thing, he wasn't ready. He wasn't prepared for whatever this was. But he couldn't turn back now. He had crossed that line when he decided to help her. I don't have a choice, do I? He asked, his voice tinged with frustration. Not anymore, she replied softly, her gaze never leaving his. Once the mark is placed, there's no going back. Nick looked down at her hand, the one that now held his. He could feel the warmth of her touch, the pulse of life running through her, but it wasn't enough to calm the storm brewing inside him. He didn't know if he was strong enough for what was coming. He didn't even know if he was strong enough to protect her. But as they stood there, alone in the dim light of the alley, one thing became clear, he couldn't walk away. He wouldn't. What happens if we can't survive? Nick asked, the weight of his words sinking in. Liora's expression softened, but there was an undeniable sadness in her eyes. We will survive, she said quietly. Because we have to. There's no other choice. Nick nodded, his resolve hardening. As long as they were in this together, as long as he was bound to her, he would do everything in his power to keep her safe. But deep down, he knew the road ahead would not be easy. There were more questions than answers, and the dangers they faced were unlike anything he had ever imagined. And yet, despite the uncertainty, there was something in Liora's eyes, something in the way she held herself, that made him believe they could survive this. Maybe not alone. But together. Let's go, he said, his voice steady now. We'll figure it out. Together. Liora gave him a small, grateful smile, and with that, they continued their journey, not knowing what lay ahead, but knowing they had each other. And for now, that was enough. Ivan's words echoed in Nick's mind as they walked deeper into the city, the quiet hum of the night wrapping around them. The weight of what they were facing pressed down on him, but he couldn't stop now. He couldn't turn back. The mark, the pact, the undeniable connection between him and Liora, he didn't understand any of it, but one thing was certain, they were in this together. They had no choice but to keep moving forward. As they turned a corner, the city stretched out before them, an endless maze of streets, buildings, and shadows. It felt like a different world now. A world where nothing was certain, where every step could lead to danger. The light from a distant street lamp flickered in the distance, casting long, eerie shadows across the cracked pavement. Lyra's grip on his hand tightened, and for the first time since they had met, she spoke. "Nick," she said, her voice soft but serious, "do you ever wonder why this is happening? Why me? Why you?" Nick didn't answer immediately. The question had been haunting him for days, ever since he had helped her escape the hunters. Why had he been chosen? Why had fate thrown them together? What did the mark mean? But despite all the questions, one thing was clear to him now, he couldn't walk away. Not now. Not after everything that had happened. "I don't know," Nick replied, his voice quiet, thoughtful. "But I know that I'm not going to leave you. No matter what." Lyra looked at him, her eyes softening, a mixture of gratitude and sadness in her gaze. "You don't understand, Nick," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "You don't know what you're really a part of. This mark, this pact, it's more than just a connection. It's a bond. A bond that ties you to me in ways you can't undo. And once you're bound, there's no escape." Nick stopped walking, his heart pounding. He looked at her, trying to make sense of what she was saying. "Then what do we do?" he asked, his voice thick with uncertainty. Lyra's gaze dropped to the ground for a moment, as if searching for the right words. "We survive," she said softly. "We find a way to live with this. Together." Nick looked at her, trying to find the strength to believe her, but the uncertainty was still there, gnawing at him. "And what about the hunters? What about Ivan?" Lyra paused, her expression hardening. "Ivan is only a messenger. A part of a bigger force, one that has been watching me for a long time. The real danger is still out there. We're just a small part of something much bigger." Nick felt a chill run down his spine. The more Lyra spoke, the more he realized just how deep this ran. They weren't just fighting for survival, they were caught in the middle of something far beyond their control. "So, what's the plan?" he asked, his voice steadying. Lyra's eyes met his, a flicker of resolve in them. "We find the others. The ones who can help us. And we make sure the pact is broken, before it's too late." Nick nodded slowly, the weight of her words settling over him. They didn't have much time. The danger was real, and the road ahead would be perilous. But with Lyra by his side, he knew they would face it together. They had no other choice. The world had changed, and so had they. And now, they would have to face whatever came next, head on. Ivan's cryptic warning lingered in Nick's mind as they walked through the darkened streets, their footsteps echoing softly in the quiet city. The weight of the unknown pressed heavily on both of them. Lyra walked beside him, her pace steady, but Nick could feel the tension radiating off her. She was hiding something, he could tell. Something important, something that she was too afraid to share. "You're sure there's no way out of this?" Nick asked, trying to keep his voice calm, though doubt gnawed at him. "We're not just running from Ivan. We're running from something much bigger, aren't we?" Lyra's eyes flickered to him briefly before she looked away, her expression clouded with uncertainty. "Yes," she said quietly. "But running won't solve it. We need to find the others. The ones who can help us." Nick nodded, though he wasn't sure he fully understood. The others. Who were they? What could they possibly do to help? And what about the mark? The binding pact that tied them together. He had no answers, just more questions, and time was running out. They continued walking in silence, the city stretching endlessly before them. The buildings loomed like silent sentinels, their shadows deep and impenetrable. The streets felt like they were closing in around them. "What if we can't find them?" Nick asked, his voice barely more than a whisper. "What if it's too late?" Lyra stopped walking, her grip tightening on his hand. "It's never too late," she said firmly, though there was a flicker of doubt in her eyes. "We don't have a choice. We can't let the mark control us. If we don't break it, we'll be trapped, both of us, forever." The urgency in her voice was enough to push Nick forward, despite the fear that was starting to settle in his chest. "Then we find them," he said with determination. "We'll figure it out, together." Lyra's eyes softened, a hint of gratitude flickering in them. "You don't know what you're saying," she murmured, but there was no anger in her voice, only quiet appreciation. "You're in this now, Nick. There's no going back." They resumed walking, and as the city continued to unfold around them, Nick realized that no matter how much he wished to turn back, there was no escaping the path they were on. They had crossed that point of no return the moment he had helped her. Now, their fates were inextricably linked. But even as he acknowledged the depth of his situation, a strange sense of peace settled over him. He wasn't alone in this. Lyra, for all her mystery and the danger that surrounded her, was someone he could trust. They would face whatever came next together. They had to. A few minutes later, the dark alleyways began to thin out, and the streetlights began to brighten as they walked closer to the city's main square. The air felt different here, almost charged with an energy Nick couldn't explain. Something was waiting. Something important. And then, ahead of them, through the crowd, Nick saw a figure standing beneath a lamppost. His heart skipped a beat as he recognized the person standing there, someone he hadn't expected to see, someone who might be the key to everything. It was a man, tall, with a calm demeanor that contrasted sharply with the storm brewing inside Nick. The man's eyes met Nick's, and a small, knowing smile tugged at his lips. "You found her," the man said, his voice smooth, almost comforting. "I knew you would."